Actor Michael Berryman was born with ectodermal dysplasia, a rare genetic disorder that left him without hair, fingernails, or sweat glands, stripping him of the body's natural ability to regulate temperature. His striking appearance made him a fixture in horror films, most notably in The Hills Have Eyes, which became a life-threatening ordeal to film. Shot in the Mojave Desert, Berryman was forced to endure heavy costumes and layers of makeup under a merciless sun, all while his body lacked the ability to sweat or cool itself. He later described the experience as grueling and admitted that without strict precautions from the crew, he could have easily collapsed and died from heat stroke during the production. For years, Ray Brent Marsh, operator of the Tri-State Crematory in Georgia, failed to cremate hundreds of bodies entrusted to him. Instead, he left 339 corpses scattered in the woods, stuffed into sheds, or piled into vaults. Some decayed beyond recognition, others mummified or still in body bags, bloated and oozing fluids as the stench reportedly spread for miles. Families were unknowingly given cement powder, sawdust, or crushed concrete in urns, led to believe it was the ashes of their loved ones. Marsh claimed the cremation machine was broken, but it was fully functional, leading to him giving bizarre shifting excuses such as the claim that he actually opposed cremation. He eventually pleaded guilty to nearly 800 charges and spent 12 years in prison. Lee Redmond held the world record for the longest fingernails at 28 feet in total length after growing them out for more than 30 years. She said she had to sleep in a special uncomfortable position and couldn't drive because of them. But she eventually lost them after she was ejected from the passenger seat in a 4-car pileup that resulted in serious injuries. For 60 years, an unknown figure dressed in black visited Edgar Allan Poe's grave on his birthday, January 19th. Starting in the 1930s, he would pour himself a glass of cognac and raise a toast in front of the grave, before leaving behind 3 roses and the unfinished bottle of cognac. The man never spoke and was never identified. In 1942, forest rangers discovered something disturbingly odd at a lake located high in the Himalayas. There were over 200 ancient skeletons with blunt force trauma to their skulls, but the strangest part was that they were from distinct populations that died about 1,000 years apart. Researchers say the lake may have served as a recurring death trap over the centuries, with many likely dying from sudden hailstorms, which explains the cracked skulls. Many of the skeletons can still be seen emerging from the thawing ice in the summer, some with their hair and flesh still intact. On August 4th, 2026, celebrity blogger Perez Hilton was hospitalized after live streaming an apparent mental health crisis from his South Florida home. During the disturbing broadcast, Hilton appeared completely covered in blood and seemingly harmed himself as horrified viewers contacted authorities, while TikTok also reportedly alerted police after detecting the live stream. Even more disturbing, Hilton's 3 children had reportedly been inside the home shortly before the crisis. His sister and niece realized something was seriously wrong and fled with the children only minutes before the live stream began. Police arrived around 7 p.m., but rather than immediately entering the home, spent nearly 4 hours attempting to de-escalate the situation out of concern that a confrontation could potentially provoke a suicide by cops scenario. Hilton was eventually taken to a hospital and placed under Florida's Baker Act for psychiatric evaluation. The incident followed an already brutal year for the famous blogger. Months earlier, Perez spent 21 days hospitalized after a perforated ulcer led to severe sepsis, and soon afterward, doctors discovered a massive blood clot in his leg requiring emergency surgery. A few weeks before the live stream, Hilton also publicly admitted he was in a spiral and felt overwhelmed after moving back to Miami, a city he's reportedly associated with traumatic memories, including witnessing his father and grandfather dying just a week apart when he was younger. As of the latest update, Hilton remains hospitalized and receiving treatment, with his family saying he's safe, able to communicate, and surrounded by loved ones, while asking the public to respect his privacy as he recovers. This woman lived an entire second life, then woke up. In June of 2025, 19-year-old Clélia Verdier of France was placed into a medically induced coma after an overdose on medication. But inside her mind, those 21 days became 7 full years. She fell in love, got married, endured the vivid pain of childbirth, and gave birth to triplets named Mila, Miles, and Miley. She said the experience was completely indistinguishable from reality, remembering everything from family vacations and bedtime routines to the heartbreak of losing one of her babies shortly after birth. To her, there was never a moment where it felt like a dream. She believed it was simply her life. When she woke up, her first question was where her children were, before doctors explained the family she had spent 7 years loving had never existed. More than a year later, she says she still mourns the family she vividly remembers, and still feels like their mother despite knowing they only existed in her subconscious. Here's a photo of Marine Sergeant Tyler Ziegel and his partner Renee Klein on their wedding day in 2006, before she would end up divorcing him just 1 year later due to his disfigurement. While on tour in Iraq, Ziegel was critically injured in a suicide bombing, losing his left hand, 3 fingers on his right hand, part of his skull, and sight in one eye, while his ears, nose, and lips were completely burnt off. Unable to work, he relied on benefits from the VA, but they paid him much less than expected, so he struggled financially. In 2012, Ziegel tragically died from an overdose on morphine and alcohol at the young age of 30. In 2023, a 17-year-old high school student from Florida died from an allergic reaction to pistachio nuts. She reportedly asked the staff if the baklava being served contained any nuts and was told no, despite baklava always being made with nuts. The girl immediately started showing signs of a severe reaction and was allowed to leave school to pick up some Benadryl from a local pharmacy, but the school never called 911. The teenager soon went into anaphylactic shock, slipped into a coma, and tragically passed away. Her family is now suing the school for $50,000 for their critical negligence. I'll never look at Pokemon the same after this. An unknown perpetrator recently managed to hack into Game Freak's documents and released countless files, including future game data, personal info about employees, and most notoriously, lore stories about sexual relationships between humans and Pokemon. One such story involves a young girl who is kidnapped by a Typhlosion disguised as a human that apparently proceeds to grape the child and get her pregnant with a human Pokemon hybrid. Another story involves a group of humans that capture and torture a bunch of Slackoths. One of the women in the group is later kidnapped by the Slackoth tribe and impregnated by their slacking leader, eventually giving birth to her own Slackoth baby. Similar disturbing stories detail human relationships with Lapras, Rapidash, and Octillery. Game Freak has reportedly apologized to everyone affected by the data breach, but it's unclear why these particular unsettling stories were ever written in the first place, let alone found among Game Freak's files. In 1967, line worker Randall Champion accidentally grabbed a high-voltage line, instantly electrocuting himself and stopping his heart. That's when fellow lineman J.D. Thompson immediately rushed over and performed CPR until paramedics arrived. Champion ended up surviving, and this famous photo became known as the Kiss of Life. This beach in Turkey is one of the only beaches in the world that's accessible to handicapped people. When she was 7 years old, Christina Santhouse was diagnosed with a life-threatening condition that forced doctors to remove half of her brain. But she miraculously grew up to earn a master's degree and now works as a professional speech pathologist. This man made a vow to never sit down or lie flat for 12 years in an effort to grow closer to God. To maintain the vow, he sleeps while standing using suspended supports like the one seen here. Years of continuous standing have reportedly left his legs severely swollen, with damaged veins, chronic fluid buildup, thick blackened skin, and permanent deformities caused by constantly fighting gravity. But despite the excruciating pain and physical deterioration, he's continued the practice as an act of extreme religious devotion. A 41-year-old man with advanced HIV developed mysterious tumors that didn't match any known human cancer. Doctors later discovered that the growths were actually cancer cells from a tapeworm living inside his body, the first known case of cancer spreading from a parasite into a human. Here's a clip showing the terrifying teeth of a boa constrictor. While boas kill their prey with constriction rather than venom, their mouths are lined with dozens of long razor-sharp teeth that curve backwards like hooks. These teeth are designed to grab and hold struggling animals, making it nearly impossible for prey to pull free once the snake has bitten down. Unlike humans, boas also continuously replace their teeth throughout their lives, ensuring that they always have a fresh set ready for hunting. Before playing Vecna, Jamie Campbell Bower spiraled into heroin addiction and said he was 1 week away from dying. He's talked about waking up in places he didn't remember, overdosing, and losing control of his life. He eventually entered rehab, got sober, and described the experience as surviving the darkest years of his life. Before Stranger Things made him famous, Joe Keery survived a serious car accident that easily could have killed him. The car flipped and was completely wrecked, and he later said he only walked away because the airbags deployed at the exact right moment. The crash left him shaken for years, realizing how close he'd come to death before anyone knew his name. Gaten Matarazzo was born with cleidocranial dysplasia, a condition so rare it affects less than 1 in a million people. It left him without collarbones, caused severe skull and dental abnormalities, and forced him into repeated surgeries to expose impacted teeth and install prosthetics. The condition itself can cause brittle bones, dangerous airway problems, and lifelong complications. Before Stranger Things, he was rejected from audition after audition for his appearance, but the show ultimately wrote his real disorder into Dustin's character, and Gaten now uses his platform to raise awareness for those living with CCD. Creator of Naruto Masashi Kishimoto endured a grueling work schedule that pushed him to the brink of physical and emotional collapse. He routinely worked up to 20 hours per day, leading to several hospitalizations, and even missing the birth of his own child due to crushing deadlines. By the final arcs of Naruto, he admitted to feeling emotionally numb, simply trying to survive the demands of the series. Writing certain death scenes took a drastic personal toll on him, and he received constant death threats from fans over controversial plot decisions. Much of his work was inspired by feelings of deep isolation and insecurity, stemming from his youth and the constant comparisons to his twin brother. These personal struggles bled into Naruto's themes of loneliness, rejection, and the desperate need for acknowledgement. In 1992, Pepsi launched a promotion in the Philippines called Number Fever, offering 1 million pesos to anyone with the winning bottle cap number, a life-changing prize for most people in the country at the time. On May 25th, the winning number announced was 349, but due to a printing error, over 600,000 caps with that number had been distributed. Thousands of people thought they had won, only to be told their prizes wouldn't be honored, and chaos quickly ensued. Riots broke out, Pepsi trucks were bombed, and at least 5 people were killed, including a mother and her child when a grenade was thrown at a delivery truck. Pepsi offered small consolation payments, but the damage was done. The scandal became one of the most infamous marketing disasters in history, and Pepsi never fully regained public trust in the Philippines. This 4,600-year-old Egyptian statue was made completely from wood other than the quartz and copper that make up its eyeballs. It's just one example of the incredible level of craftsmanship achieved during ancient times. These are the first ever drawings of the moon made by Galileo after observing it through his telescope in 1690. Here's a before and after of the excavation of an ancient Greek stadium located in modern-day Turkey. It was built around 1st century AD and once held a capacity of 30,000 people. This is the impressive flexibility of a Swedish Knight Sabaton from 1560. This is a watch that once belonged to a Japanese man named Akito Kawagoe. It's permanently stopped at 8:15 since that was the exact time the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. In 2021, 16-year-old Kennedy Littledyke was ejected from her car during a high-speed crash in Idaho, miraculously landing on a 30-foot high power line dangling upside down by her now broken leg. The pressure from the wire pinched her femoral artery, preventing her from bleeding out, while an electrical burn cauterized another wound in her neck. She hung there for about an hour until rescuers finally cut the power and freed her. Despite having 21 surgeries and losing her leg, Kennedy miraculously survived, and now shares her story and journey to recovery to inspire others online. In 2020, 16-year-old promising soccer player Alexander Gomez was tragically shot and killed by police in Mexico after officers allegedly mistook him for a criminal when he was riding his motorcycle to buy a soda. The killing sparked national outrage and drew attention to police violence in Mexico. At the boy's funeral, his teammates honored him by placing his coffin in front of a goalpost and gently kicking a soccer ball against it to score his final goal, a moving tribute to a life full of promise that was cut tragically short. In honor of April Fool's Day, here are some pranks that went so far they got people killed. In 2021, YouTube prankster Timothy Wilkes had approached a group of strangers in a Nashville parking lot while carrying a butcher knife. He was apparently staging a fake robbery to see how people would react, but was almost immediately shot and killed by David Starnes Jr., who said he was unaware that he was being pranked and fired in self-defense. No one was charged. In 2012, Montana man Randy Lee Tenley was trying to spark reported sightings of Bigfoot by dressing up in a ghillie suit and standing in the middle of a highway. He tragically ended up being struck by 2 different cars and was pronounced dead at the scene. In 1996, the captain and flight engineer of a Colombian cargo flight decided to prank their novice first officer by giving him control of the plane after shutting off 2 engines. The plane stalled immediately after takeoff and crashed into a neighborhood, killing 22 people, including several children who were playing soccer on the ground. When Greg Gingrich took his daughter to the Grand Canyon in 1992, he thought it would be hilarious to pretend that he was falling. So he climbed over the barrier and windmilled his arms before losing his footing, causing him to actually plummet 400 feet to his death while his young daughter watched in horror. In 2012, an Indian nurse who was the caretaker for the Duchess of Cambridge was prank called by an Australian radio station pretending to be the Queen. This led to her revealing confidential information that ended up being broadcast on the radio. 3 days later, the nurse took her own life. Known for his sense of humor, Italian pro soccer player Luciano Riccone took one joke just a little too far in 1977. He decided to fake a robbery at his friend's jewelry shop in Rome, unaware of the fact that the shop was actually robbed just 2 weeks prior and the owner was still paranoid. Luciano ran into the store yelling, "Stop, this is a robbery," while covering his face. Unfortunately, his friend acted quickly and shot Riccone directly in the chest with a shotgun. And the man's final words were, "It's just a joke." With the tragic passing of Pope Francis, let's take a look at some of the popes throughout history who died in much crazier ways. For 300 years, the office of the Pope was almost certainly a death sentence. It's said that 28 out of the first 31 popes were murdered, many in violent ways. For example, ancient Roman authorities executed Saint Clement I by attaching an anchor to his neck and dropping him into the Black Sea. He would eventually become the patron saint of mariners. Tradition holds that an angry mob killed Pope Saint Calixtus by throwing him down a well. The well is still preserved at the Church of Santa Maria in Rome. Saint Sixtus II was celebrating Mass in the catacombs of San Callisto when Roman soldiers suddenly stormed in. The Pope was then decapitated along with 4 of his deacons right in front of his congregation. Pope Saint Pontian died of forced labor in mines after being exiled to Sardinia. He resigned the papacy, the first pope to do so, knowing there was no chance for him to return alive. It's widely rumored that Pope Paul II died of a heart attack in 1471 while being sodomized by a page boy. Legend has it that Pope Adrian IV, the only English pope in history, died after choking on a fly that flew into his mouth while he was drinking wine. On his deathbed in 1492, Innocent VIII's doctors reportedly tried to revive him by transfusing blood from 3 young boys. All 3 children reportedly died from the experiment, and the Pope died shortly afterwards. It's often cited as one of the first recorded and failed blood transfusions. Pope Saint Clement II died suddenly in 1047, just 1 year into his reign. Nearly 1,000 years later, in 1959, a medical exam of his body revealed dangerously high levels of lead, suggesting he was actually poisoned. And last but not least, considered by many to have been the worst pope in history, the reign of Pope John XII involved gambling with church funds, ordaining a child bishop, and allegedly toasting to the devil. It's widely believed that he either died of a stroke while having sex with a married woman or was beaten to death by her husband. Here are some morbid facts about the Pope. Popes can't be organ donors because their body becomes property of the church once they die. This rule invalidated Pope Benedict's organ donor card, which he had held since the 1970s. This practice ensures the preservation of the body for potential future veneration, especially if the Pope is canonized as a saint. It's been long rumored that when a Pope dies, it's tradition to hit him on the head with a silver hammer to ensure that he's actually dead and not just sleeping. In 897, Pope Stephen VI had his dead predecessor Pope Formosus dug up, dressed in papal robes, and put on trial. They propped his corpse on a throne, screamed at it, found him guilty, severed 3 of his fingers, and threw his body in the river. The public was so horrified by the grotesque trial that Stephen VI was soon imprisoned and strangled to death. When Pope Pius XII died, his embalming was so poorly botched that his body began to rot and blow almost immediately. During the public viewing, his nose fell off, and his body reportedly exploded from gas buildup inside of the casket due to blistering heat. In 1981, a Turkish man shot Pope John Paul II 4 times but didn't kill him. After the Pope recovered, he visited the assassin in prison and gave him his forgiveness. The assassin was soon pardoned at the Pope's request, and 33 years after his crime, he visited the Vatican and laid flowers on the Pope's tomb. Ira Hayes was a Native American Marine who was one of the men photographed raising the American flag over Iwo Jima in 1945. But despite national fame after the war, Hayes suffered from severe PTSD and descended deep into alcoholism. In January of 1955, he tragically ended up freezing to death while drunk in the Arizona desert. In 1958, the U.S. Air Force accidentally dropped a nuke on 4 kids playing in the woods of South Carolina. Thankfully, it didn't have its nuclear core installed yet, but still caused several injuries. Discovered at the age of 18, Susan Peters had a very successful acting career until she was shot during a hunting trip in 1945. Her husband's rifle accidentally fired into her spine, leaving her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. A few years later, one day Peters told her doctor, "I'm getting awfully tired. I think it would possibly be better if I just died." She then starved herself for the next few months until tragically dying from pneumonia at the young age of 31. In 2023, 6 Mississippi cops who called themselves the Goon Squad stormed into a home without a warrant after a neighbor complained about 2 black men staying with a white woman. What followed was hours of torture straight out of a nightmare. The officers tased the men, forced them to strip, and poured milk, alcohol, and chocolate syrup over their bodies while taunting them with racial slurs. They made them crawl on the floor, threatened to sexually assault them, and even forced them to shower together at gunpoint. The ordeal finally ended after one officer shoved a gun into Michael Jenkins' mouth and pulled the trigger, shattering his jaw but somehow not killing him. To cover it up, the squad planted drugs and filed false reports, but the truth eventually came out and all 6 were sentenced to decades in prison. In 2020, an ancient fast food restaurant was uncovered during an excavation. Traces of pork, fish, snails, and rodents were even found in some of the containers. The Sorceress Kit is a box of trinkets discovered in the garden of a Pompeii home. It's believed to have been used as a toolkit by an ancient fortune teller. A loaf of bread made just before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius was discovered in 2018. It even still has a Roman bread stamp on it, which bakeries were required to do to prevent fraud. Here's a 2,000-year-old Beware of Dog mosaic that was discovered in front of the home of a Roman poet. This beautifully intact mosaic was discovered during an excavation just last year. A gold snake bracelet was found on the arm of a woman who was killed during the eruption. On the inside, there's an inscription that reads, "From a master to his slave girl." In 2013, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a 30-year-old man who appears to have survived the initial eruption, only to be killed when he was struck by a large slab of stone. This creepy-looking costume is actually a 16th century scuba suit designed by Leonardo da Vinci. It was equipped with 2 breathing tubes attached to a cork diving bell floating on the surface. While working in the water city of Venice, Da Vinci designed the suit for sneak attacks on enemy ships from underwater. This golden throne chair was found in the tomb of King Tut. Its colors haven't faded over 3,000 years, highlighting the impressive skills of ancient Egyptian craftsmen. Here's the anchor of a 13th century Mongol invasion ship that was just recently lifted out of the sea near Nagasaki, Japan. Discovered in a dried-up lake bed in New Mexico, this mile-long path of footprints is the longest prehistoric human trail ever found. The 12,000-year-old tracks belong to a toddler and its young adult mother who was in a hurry and sometimes carried the child on her back. It was most likely a perilous journey since scientists also found the footprints of mammoths, giant sloths, direwolves, and saber-toothed tigers at the same site. Artifact Porn, Part 22. In 1731, King Frederick of Sweden sent a taxidermist his favorite lion after it died. But the taxidermist had never seen a lion before, so this was the result, the derpiest lion in the world. Here are some carbonized loaves of bread that were found in the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, both of which were buried in volcanic ash following the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. These stair dust corners were introduced in the 1800s to make sweeping easier. They would prevent dust from accumulating in the corners. Here's what the Great Pyramid of Giza looked like 4,500 years ago compared to today. All the pyramids were originally covered in polished white limestone, while the capstone at the top was covered in gold. In the summer of 2018 in Crete, a farmer was trying to park in the shade of an olive tree on his property. Suddenly the ground gave out and he discovered an ancient Minoan tomb that hadn't been touched in at least 3,400 years. In 2012, a freak accident saved this woman's life in the craziest way possible. 42-year-old Donna Barber was at a family gathering in Arkansas when her teenage son accidentally shot her straight in the neck with a bow and arrow. The arrow pierced the side of her throat just inches from her carotid artery, close enough that she could feel her pulse pounding against the shaft. For a moment, Dawn remained standing in shock before collapsing in a pool of her own blood. As her family screamed in panic, some believing they'd just witnessed her death, she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But during emergency scans, doctors made a chilling discovery. Nestled deep in her neck, not far from the arrow's path, was a cancerous tumor growing in her thyroid. It hadn't caused any symptoms yet, and without the arrow, it likely would have gone unnoticed until it was far too late. Surgeons carefully removed the arrow then the tumor in a single surgery, and Dawn miraculously went on to make a full recovery. In 1986, Andres Martinez lost control of his tanker truck and crashed into a mountain pass in Spain. He and his wife died on impact, but their 10-year-old son Juan Pedro was nowhere to be seen. No sign or remains of him have ever been found to this day, as Interpol has called it the strangest missing person case in Europe. The founder of North Face, Douglas Tompkins, died from hypothermia after a kayaking accident in 2015. He'd been traveling with longtime friend and Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard in the mountains of Patagonia. In 1964, actor Peter Sellers inhaled some poppers before getting in bed with his wife. He was apparently trying to achieve the ultimate gasm, but instead suffered 8 heart attacks over a 3-hour span. In 1999, tobacco manufacturer Philip Morris tried convincing the government of the Czech Republic that smoking was highly beneficial to the country. They argued that more people would die earlier as a result of smoking, thus helping the government save millions on pensions, hospitals, and housing for the elderly. A woman from Turkey recently underwent surgery to have 35 olive pits, 28 date seeds, and 5 stones removed from her digestive tract. She was experiencing severe abdominal pain, leading to the discovery that she'd been swallowing various pits and seeds for decades. After narrowly avoiding death due to the complications, she's now vocal about urging people to never swallow large seeds. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, General Eisenhower was under so much stress that he'd been smoking 6 packs of cigarettes, drinking 24 cups of coffee, and averaging just 2 hours of sleep every day. In the 1950s, 3 campers were found dead at their campsite in Oregon without any sign of struggle. Investigators were stumped until they soon found a dead newt in the hunter's coffee pot. They likely died after drinking the coffee, since newts can produce a toxin that's 10,000 times more potent than cyanide. Ancient Greek lawmaker Charondas issued a law stating that anyone who brought weapons into the Athenian assembly would be executed. One day after hunting in the countryside, he entered the assembly without knowing that his hunting knife was still attached to his belt. He then promptly took his own life to uphold his own law. Children's entertainer and YouTuber Stephen John, aka Blippi, hasn't always been so family-friendly. He began his career as a gross-out video creator under the name Steezy Grossman, and would post shocking videos of himself performing grotesque acts across illicit websites. Most infamously, he performed the Harlem Shake in 2013 while standing unclothed on a toilet and defecated all over his unclothed friend. Despite Steven's regret and extensive efforts to have the video removed from the internet, it can still be found rather easily. Don't try to find it. Please don't. Oh my god, why did I watch it? What the fuck, Blippi? In 2013, unemployed 30-year-old Princeton graduate Thomas Gilbert Jr. shot and killed his hedge fund manager father just hours after being told his $1,000 weekly allowance would be cut down to just $300. He was sentenced to at least 30 years in prison. A Japanese pilot who bombed a town in Oregon during World War II returned 20 years later to present his family's 400-year-old sword as a symbol of regret. His daughter said that if he had received a negative reaction, he would have used the sword to perform seppuku on himself instead. In 2022, Twitch streamer and former adult star Adriana Chechik broke her back after jumping into a deceptively shallow foam pit at TwitchCon. The pit was barely padded over concrete and she fractured her spine in multiple places. While hospitalized, she discovered that she was pregnant, but the emergency surgery forced her to terminate the pregnancy. Metal rods were implanted as she had to relearn how to walk and was left with lasting nerve damage. The incident sparked outrage as others were also injured, but no real accountability followed. Chechik later said the experience destroyed a part of her life that she'll never get back. In 1996, Polish model and former Miss International Agnieszka Kotlarska narrowly escaped death when she canceled her seat at the last minute on TWA Flight 800, the doomed flight that exploded midair, killing all 230 people on board. But just weeks later, fate caught up with her. As she arrived home, a stalker she once knew attacked without warning, stabbing her to death in front of her husband and young daughter. To prove that mosquitoes transmitted yellow fever, American physician Jesse William Lazier deliberately allowed himself to be bitten by an infected mosquito. 17 days later, Lazier died from the very disease he was trying to study. His death confirmed the deadly role of mosquitoes in spreading yellow fever, sacrificing his life to save millions of others. The short-faced bear was once the most abundant bear in all of North America until it went extinct around 11,000 BC. Some scientists argue that these massive bears delayed human migration into North America because they kept killing men trying to cross the Bering Strait. Heart Attack Grill is a restaurant in Las Vegas where customers over 350 pounds eat for free. The only vegan option on the menu is cigarettes, and up to 3 people have died from heart attacks while eating there. In 1940, Walt Disney hired 11 little people to dress up as Pinocchio and wave to people at the movie's premiere. He left them on a theater balcony with enough food and wine for the day, but there was no way for them to get down. By late afternoon, they had all taken off their thick, sweaty costumes and were naked, drunk, and swearing at parents and their children. This photo shows The Undertaker looking down at medical staff after chokeslamming Mick Foley through the roof of Hell in a Cell. The fall was completely unplanned and left Foley with multiple dislocations, bruised ribs, and internal bleeding. The Undertaker was certain he'd just killed the man, but Foley got up and even finished the match. The band Fleetwood Mac highly considered thanking their drug dealer in the credits of their most popular album, Rumors. They only decided against it after their dealer was murdered. In 2010, a commercial plane crash in Africa killed everyone on board except for one passenger, who was left with an insane story to tell his rescuers. Apparently, a man smuggled a crocodile on board, which managed to escape shortly before landing. This made everyone panic and run to one side of the plane at one time, causing it to flip and eventually crash. In 2007, Miles Teller narrowly survived a horrific car crash when the vehicle he was inside of flipped 8 times at nearly 80 miles per hour, ejecting him through a window and flinging his body over 30 feet. He was found unconscious and covered in blood, with deep facial gashes and a broken wrist, injuries that required years of painful laser treatments. As if that weren't enough, within the next year, Miles lost 2 of his closest friends in separate vehicle accidents just weeks apart. One was killed in a motorcycle crash and the other in a car accident. Both devastating losses that deeply affected Teller in his early 20s. As a result, the actor developed a profound sense of gratitude and now takes nothing for granted, an outlook that deeply influences both his personal life and career. In 1992, Annette Herfkens was the sole survivor of a plane crash that killed all 30 others on board, including her fiancé. The aircraft went down in the remote Vietnamese jungle just 50 minutes into the flight. Trapped inside the mangled wreckage with a collapsed lung, broken ribs, and surrounded by rotting corpses, she was too injured to leave the crash site. For 8 days, she fought to stay alive by drinking rainwater as the stench of death closed in. As her body weakened, she even considered cannibalizing the bodies around her, but didn't have the strength for it. When rescuers finally arrived, she was barely conscious, buried in wreckage and decay next to the corpse of the love of her life, but she eventually made a full recovery. During a match in Germany in 1993, star tennis player Monica Seles was stabbed in the back with a 9-inch kitchen knife by Günter Parch, an obsessed fan of her rival Steffi Graf. Parch was infuriated that Seles had overtaken Graf as the #1 player in the world, and admitted that he wanted to injure Seles so severely that she couldn't play tennis for a long time. Following the attack, Seles took a 2-year hiatus from pro tennis and never fully regained her prior dominance. The attacker received a suspended sentence with probation and psychological treatment, a verdict that sparked widespread outrage across the sports world. In 2019, a French man accidentally killed his friend during a fight and in a panic stuffed his body under his mattress. To avoid suspicion, he slept on it for nearly 2 years while regularly spraying air fresheners and bug repellent to mask the stench. He was eventually caught when the odor became overwhelming for his neighbors. In 1984, California man David Burke was fired from his airline job for a petty theft, so he smuggled a loaded gun onto the flight, shot the pilots mid-air, and deliberately crashed the plane into the ground, killing all 43 passengers on board. Investigators later found a note in his pocket addressed to his former boss stating, "I asked for some leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none." Built during the reign of King Louis XVI in 1774, the Writing Boy was the first automatic android ever created. It was hand-built by Swiss watchmaker Pierre-Jacques Dreux, and was designed to mimic the act of someone writing with incredible precision. A milestone in the history of robotics and engineering, the android is comprised of 6,000 moving parts that took more than 20 months to put together. The Sidarium of St. Veronica is an engraving made by French artist Claude Milan in 1649. It was created from a single spiraling, unbroken line that starts at the tip of Jesus' nose. Discovered in 1972, this 8-inch long deuce was dropped by a Viking around the 8th century. Weighing in at just under 5 corics, it's the largest fossilized human turd ever found, and has provided valuable insights into the dietary practices of ancient Vikings. In 2013, an ancient tree at an archaeological site in Romania was uprooted during a thunderstorm. Beneath the tree, the site's caretaker discovered an ancient bronze matrix that was used as a mold to craft jewelry for the Dacian civilization over 2,000 years ago. Just last year, Irish farmer Michael Boyle found this 50-pound chunk of bog butter on his property after digging up something that reeked of cheese. Ancient farmers would often bury these large chunks of animal fat in bogs for preservation. Despite it dating all the way back to the Bronze Age, Boyle says it still tastes like butter. In 2016, Texas father Daniel Shaver was held up by police after he was seen pointing a pellet gun out of his hotel window. Several officers had rifles pointed at Shafer in the hallway as he attempted to comply with them, but their commands were confusing and contradictory, especially since Shaver was drunk. For example, they told Shaver not to put his hands down for any reason before telling him to start crawling towards them. As Shaver was crawling and begging for his life, he reached back to pull his pants up and was killed instantly by Officer Philip Brailsford, who later claimed he thought Shaver was reaching for a weapon. Brailsford was charged with second-degree murder and found not guilty, since the full unedited footage wasn't released until hours after his acquittal. Brailsford was rehired by the department and reimbursed for all the medical expenses he paid, while seeking treatment for the PTSD he claimed he acquired from the shooting. Because of this, Brailsford was medically retired and now collects a $2,500 pension every month. In 2014, the incredibly preserved photograph of a young woman was found in the wreckage of the SS Central America, which sunk during a hurricane in 1857. The woman's identity is unknown, but the photo has been dubbed the Mona Lisa of the Deep. This is the earliest known depiction of Jesus Christ, scratched into a wall around 200 AD by someone who gave him a donkey's head to mock their friend for believing in Jesus. This is the only surviving handwriting of an ancient Roman emperor. It was written by Theodosius II around 430 AD and reads in Latin, "We desire that you be well." This is the only ancient Roman slave tag discovered that's still attached to its collar. Its inscription reads, "I have fled, seize me and return me to Xeninus for 1 gold coin." Here's a pictograph found at Barrier Canyon in the Utah desert depicting a humanoid with bug eyes and antennae. It's at least 2,500 years old. This is the only surviving example of a Ghiornia from the 15th century. This garb was a staple of Italian fashion in the 1400s, with this one belonging to Diego Cavaniglia, who died in 1481. Before it was found near his tomb in 2004, we only knew of gonorrheas through paintings and written records. Ariana Grande reportedly has a longtime stalker named Paige Neiman who tries to impersonate the famous singer. She's been obsessed with Grande since she was 12 years old and has allegedly undergone several plastic surgeries to look like her despite being only 20 years old. When the Titanic sank, the richest passenger on board was business mogul John Jacob Astor IV, who had enough money in his bank account to build 30 Titanics. He ended up giving up his spot in the final lifeboat to instead save the lives of a random woman and her daughter. These were the last photos of Garrett Miller, taken just minutes before a soccer goalpost tipped over and struck him in the head, killing him instantly. In 2013, a family dog named Killian was protecting a baby boy from an abusive babysitter by standing between them and growling at her. This made the boy's parents suspicious of the babysitter, so they hid a recording device under the couch and heard her swearing at the baby while possibly shaking and slapping him. The sitter eventually pleaded guilty to assault and battery of a child and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The Grinch as a kid was played by an 18-year-old actor with dwarfism. Sadly, he died of heart failure just 2 years after the movie released. When a photojournalist took this picture of a little girl in Syria, she raised her arms in surrender because she thought the camera was a gun. In 2009, Moscow native Julia Popova was stabbed in the neck by a mugger, but she was in so much shock that she walked all the way home without even realizing that the knife was embedded in her neck, just millimeters from her spinal cord. She spent more than an hour with the blade inside of her before finally going to the hospital. In 1987, Kenneth Parks drove 12 miles to his mother-in-law's house and stabbed her to death in the middle of the night. But he didn't receive any jail time because Kenneth's lawyer was able to prove that he was sleepwalking the entire time. In 2012, a woman from New York donated her kidney to save the life of her boss. Her boss later fired her when she took too long to recover from the operation. Mohammed Bajay was an Iranian serial killer who raped and killed at least 40 young boys throughout the early 2000s. But his crimes only gained national attention because of the way in which he was executed. He was stoned by a mob, lashed 100 times, stabbed by the brother of one of his victims, and then hanged. Ever since she was a little girl, Jewel Shuping always wanted to be blind. So in 2006, she poured drain cleaner into her eyes and fully blinded herself. She says she's now happier than ever after fulfilling her lifelong wish. A Massachusetts man named Kenny Waters was wrongfully imprisoned for 18 years for murder. He was finally freed in 2001 after his high school dropout sister went to law school to prove his innocence. Sadly, he died 6 months after his release in a freak accident. After a mass shooting, you would expect complete silence at the crime scene. But police say one of the eeriest things is all the phones that ring when family members are trying to find out if their loved ones are okay. According to his memoir, when Vice President J.D. Vance was 12 years old, his drug-addicted mother was once driving erratically and threatened to crash her car to kill them both. J.D. had no choice but to jump out of the speeding vehicle and run to a nearby house for help. He now refers to this event as a turning point in his life, since it prompted him to move in with his non-abusive grandmother and work towards a more stable life. In the year 2000, Mexican woman Ines Ramirez performed an hour-long C-section on herself after suffering 12 hours of constant pain. Using a large kitchen knife, she made a 7-inch vertical incision and pulled the baby boy out of her own uterus. Despite no prior medical training, both Ramirez and her baby miraculously survived. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times in prison and eventually forgave him for killing her mother. When he was released on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave him a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she realized the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's home and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while running from police. Dolly Parton was born dirt poor in a one-bedroom cabin in the mountains of Tennessee. The home had no electricity or running water, so Dolly and her 11 siblings struggled to stay clean. Their father was a sharecropper who couldn't read and struggled to make ends meet for his many children. As the family grew, the older kids took on more responsibilities, and Dolly, being the fourth of 12 children, had to look after her younger siblings, and would often entertain them with her guitar playing and singing before turning her talents into a career. Much of her music is inspired by her tough upbringing, and today she donates millions to help those in need. It's widely believed that Shrek was modeled after Maurice Tillett, aka the world's ugliest man. He was a celebrated pro wrestler in the 1940s who suffered from acromegaly, a condition that results in bone overgrowth and thickening. DreamWorks has declined to comment on whether or not this is true, despite the uncanny resemblance. Here's the Paramount Pictures logo on the day it was originally painted in 1965. DJ scratching was invented in 1975 when Grand Wizard Theodore would play his records too loudly, prompting his mother to constantly enter his room and scold him. This caused Theodore to hold the record still, accidentally moving it back and forth and liking the sound it made. In August of 2008, popular DJ deadmau5 and his tour manager missed their connecting flight in Barcelona by just a few minutes. While waiting in the terminal pissed off that they would miss their next show, they watched as their flight took off and immediately crashed due to mechanical failure, killing 154 of the 172 passengers on board. deadmau5 said after witnessing the tragedy, quote, "There were maybe 800 to 1,000 people in the airport and nobody made an effing sound. It was the creepiest shit." In Singapore, every person over 21 years old is automatically registered as an organ donor. Those who opt out are placed at the bottom of the priority list if they ever need an organ transplant. In 2010, 72-year-old Linda Chase left her roommate's dead body in the recliner chair that he died in for 18 months. She talked to his decaying corpse and watched NASCAR with him every day. After police performed a welfare check and found the man's body, Linda's only explanation was that she didn't want to be alone and he was the only person who was ever nice to her. She only got in trouble for cashing some of his benefit checks and was sentenced to 3 years probation and mental health treatment. This was the last photo ever taken of Marco Siffredi, the first man to descend Mount Everest on a snowboard. He was attempting his second descent in 2002 when Sherpas urged him not to go due to bad weather conditions, but Siffredi ignored their warnings and was never seen again. In 1999, Little League baseball player Kevin Stephen was hit in the chest by a baseball bat, causing his heart to suddenly stop. Luckily, off-duty nurse Penny Brown was in attendance and saved the boy's life by giving him CPR. 7 years later, Penny Brown was choking at a restaurant when one of the workers rushed over to give her the Heimlich maneuver, thus saving her life. That worker was Kevin Stephen. Jacques Hebert was a revolutionary French journalist during the Reign of Terror, who was heavily in favor of beheading anyone who disagreed with his radical views. After he accused Marie Antoinette of incest with her son, Hebert was sentenced to death via guillotine. He reportedly fainted several times on the way to his execution and screamed hysterically when placed under the blade. To amuse the crowd and make a statement, the executioners rigged the blade to stop inches from Hebert's neck. They did this 3 times before finally executing him on the 4th attempt. In 1996, a stalker named Robert Dewey Hoskins told Madonna's assistants that he would slash her throat from ear to ear unless she married him. He then jumped the fence at the singer's home before being shot by a bodyguard, but survived and was arrested. Madonna would later testify against Hoskins in court, saying she felt sick to her stomach just being in the same room with him and had recurring nightmares about him chasing her. After being deemed highly psychotic and extremely violent, Hoskins was sent to a mental hospital which he briefly escaped from in 2012. Just last year, a zookeeper from Uzbekistan was eaten alive while attempting to round up 3 lions that escaped from their enclosure. He apparently recorded the entire ordeal on his phone while attempting to impress his girlfriend, as his deathly screams could clearly be heard in the footage. Rescuers say they had no choice but to tranquilize 2 of the lions, while shooting the 3rd dead before finding the zookeeper's mangled remains. In 2013, a Swedish prisoner escaped from the facility because he had a severe toothache and was denied medical care. He broke out, saw a dentist who pulled out his tooth, and then turned himself back in. A 22-year-old woman from Ireland was recently left with severe internal injuries after her butt plug was pulled through her body during an MRI scan. She apparently believed she was safe to insert it before the procedure, believing the plug was made entirely of silicone. But it actually contained a metal core, causing it to react to the scanner's powerful magnets. She's expected to recover in the hospital, but this is why doctors always say you should never wear a butt plug while getting an MRI. In another ridiculous MRI case in 2023, a Brazilian lawyer tragically died after a scanner caused his gun to fire inside of the machine. After being repeatedly asked by doctors to remove all metal objects, Leandro Novaes decided not to reveal that he had a gun in his waistband, which ended up firing into his stomach. He spent several weeks in the hospital before succumbing to his costly bad decision. This case was a big reason why doctors always remind their patients to remove any firearms before receiving an MRI. In the middle of a courtroom in 1993, Ellie Nessler fatally shot Daniel Driver 5 times in the head during his trial after he sexually abused her 6-year-old son. She claimed she acted in a moment of rage after learning that Driver might evade justice. Ellie was initially sentenced to 10 years in prison after it was revealed she was high on meth during the shooting, but only ended up serving 3. In 2015, a stray cat named Masha found an abandoned baby inside a box in the freezing cold streets of Russia. She climbed in to keep the baby warm while meowing to get the attention of passers-by, thus saving the baby's life. In 1985, Clive Wearing suffered a severe case of amnesia after a viral infection caused damage to the hippocampus of his brain. Ever since then, his memory only lasts about 20 seconds before completely resetting, since his brain is incapable of forming new memories. He spends all day thinking he just woke up from the coma he was in 1985. Clive often gets very frustrated in the middle of conversations, and can't even remember what food he's eating by the time it reaches his mouth. When asked what it's like to have this awful condition, Clive replied, "It's exactly the same as being dead. To be dead is easy. You don't do anything at all. I've never been bored or upset. I've never been anything at all. It's exactly the same as death. No dreams even. Day and night, the same." While filming for Gladiator, Oliver Reed died suddenly after challenging a group of sailors to a drinking contest at a bar. The actor consumed 8 pints of beer, 12 shots of rum, several shots of cognac, and an entire bottle of whiskey. He fell ill during the match and collapsed, dying of a heart attack in the ambulance en route to the hospital. It ended up costing the production company $3 million to recreate Reed's face with CGI, so he could appear in all the scenes that still needed to be filmed. Here's a photo taken by Challenger Deep of a beer bottle resting on the ocean floor 35,000 feet down, the deepest known point on the Earth's surface. This is the last known photo taken of Janet Johnson, a famous American mountaineer known for completing many difficult climbs throughout the world. She disappeared along with her friend John Cooper during a climb in 1973, until their bodies were found separately 2 years later, both wearing just one shoe and missing their ice picks. Cooper was found with a bloody wound on his stomach and a look of horror frozen on his face. Accordingly, several people, including examiners of the autopsy, believe that both Cooper and Johnson were murdered. The photo above was only discovered in 2020 when climbers found Janet's backpack and camera within the melting glacier. In 1978, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen hosted a party in their New York City hotel room, the morning after which Nancy was found dead in the bathroom with a single stab wound to her abdomen. Despite being comatose on drugs the entire night and having zero recollection, Vicious admitted to the stabbing and was charged with her murder. Many believe that Nancy was actually killed by a drug dealer who was attempting to rob the drugged-up couple, and that Vicious was totally incapable of harming her considering the state he was in. But the bass player ended up dying of a drug overdose while out on bail before he could stand trial, and the case was closed. In 1996, Maryland woman Sharon Lopatko was killed in a bizarre case of consensual homicide. She had emailed dozens of men asking them to torture and kill her for mutual sexual gratification, before meeting a man named Robert Glass who would follow through with her request. One morning, Sharon left her husband a note saying she would never return and told him not to track down her killer. Glass ended up strangling her to death and was soon arrested after police found the emails and discovered Sharon's body on his property. He admitted to fulfilling her torture fantasy, but also maintained that her death was an accident. Glass pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years before dying of a heart attack while in prison. While investigating the illegal shark fin trade for the BBC special Gordon's Sharkbait in 2011, Gordon Ramsay and his crew were attacked by a group of men linked to drug networks in Costa Rica. They were held at gunpoint, doused with petrol, and told they would be killed if they continued filming. The shark fin trade continues to flourish to this day due to the high demand of shark fin soup, resulting in about 100 million sharks being killed every year. This was the obituary of Kathleen Demlow, who doesn't appear to be missed by her family. Here's a photo of Barbara Graham saying goodbye to her 2-year-old son Tommy before being executed via gas chamber in 1955. She was convicted for her part in the brutal murder of elderly widow Mabel Monahan during a home invasion gone wrong. In 1988, Hawaiian musician Israel Kana'i Kamakavivole called the owner of a recording studio at 3 a.m. when he was so eager to record his new idea. Despite having obviously closed for the night, the studio owner agreed since Israel was such a nice guy. Within 15 minutes, they recorded his ukulele rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow in just one take. Sadly, Israel struggled with morbid obesity throughout his life, at one point weighing over 750 pounds. After enduring several hospitalizations due to respiratory and cardiac issues, the legend would end up dying of respiratory failure at the young age of 38. Known as the girl who can't feel pain, Ashlyn Blocker was born with a congenital insensitivity to pain, a rare condition characterized by her body's inability to experience physical pain. While it may sound like a superpower, this condition has left Ashlyn without the natural warning signals that typically alert people to danger. From a young age, she accidentally injured herself countless times, forcing her parents to be constantly vigilant to prevent serious harm. In one case, she ran on a badly fractured ankle for several days before her parents finally realized that something was wrong. Here's a 1955 photo of actor James Dean pretending to sleep inside of an open casket at a furniture store in Indiana. After a fatal car crash just 7 months later, Dean would end up laying in a casket permanently. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother Alberta was also murdered 6 years after her son was assassinated. She was shot and killed by a 23-year-old black man who thought that black civil rights activists and ministers were evil. The man yelled, "You are serving a false god," and shot Alberta King with 2 handguns while she was playing an organ during a church service in Atlanta. In 1999, police were called to Matthew McConaughey's Texas home after his neighbor reported loud music and disturbances. When they arrived, ossifers found the actor playing the bongos while blazed out of his skull and completely naked. He was arrested for possession of marijuana. Many historians believe that the crotch part of medieval armor was enlarged not to make the knight's junk look bigger, but to prevent the pain caused by syphilis when their genitals rubbed against the metal. During the Cold War, the CIA highly considered using condoms as a weapon against Russia. They wanted to drop extra-large condoms that were labeled small on Soviet territory to lower their morale, but the plan was eventually scrapped. King Philip V of Spain and his court were known to play a game that translated to the imperturbable. A bunch of naked men would sit around a table covered by a cloth, while a lady underneath the table would put her mouth around one of their willies. The rest of the players would have to guess who was receiving it, and if their guess was correct, the player who was getting socked would have to leave the game. The game was won by the player who could climax without any of the other players noticing. Apparently, this game was very popular among French nobility in the 18th century. Known for playing Donna's mom in That 70s Show, actress Tanya Roberts died from a severe UTI that advanced to sepsis and multi-organ failure. She first noticed the pain while out hiking one day and decided to sleep it off. But the next morning, Roberts fell out of bed in severe pain and couldn't get back up. She was quickly rushed to the hospital where she ended up dying 2 weeks later. In 2022, a 71-year-old cyclist named William Hoche was struck by an ambulance while riding his bike in Oregon, causing multiple injuries including a fractured nose. The same ambulance brought him to the hospital but later followed up with a bill for $1,800 for the ride. Hoche has since filed a lawsuit seeking just under $1 million. After a night out in 2016, 23-year-old Royal Air Force gunner Corey McKeague suddenly vanished. Security footage showed him entering a street but never showed him exiting. Police eventually concluded that he fell asleep in a garbage bin and was crushed to death by a garbage truck. Corey's body was never found. In 2007, a 21-year-old man named Ben Carpenter, who suffers from muscular dystrophy, was pushed by a semi-truck for 4 miles after his wheelchair got stuck in the grill. Thankfully, officers heading in the opposite direction noticed the terrifying situation and stopped the driver before things got serious. Ben miraculously escaped without a scratch on him, but was traumatized by the incident. In 1960, 12-year-old Howard Doley was given an unnecessary lobotomy because his stepmother wasn't able to handle a normal preteen boy. She took him to several doctors who said Howard was perfectly healthy and blamed his questionable behavior on her bad parenting. That was until Dr. Walter Freeman, the man who popularized the lobotomy, diagnosed him with schizophrenia and offered to scramble his brain. It took Howard decades to recover from the barbaric procedure, spending years of his life in institutions, prisons, as a homeless person, and an alcoholic. Howard eventually earned a college degree and wrote several memoirs about his lobotomy. In 2009, the body of a man with graying hair was found washed up on a beach in Sligo, Ireland. He'd been checked into a nearby hotel under the name Peter Bergman, and his movements were captured on security cameras throughout the town, but aside from this, very little is known about the man. He was found with most of his clothes left behind on the shore, with no wallet, money, or form of ID. It's not even clear how he died since there was no evidence of drowning or foul play, but the post-mortem showed that he had advanced stages of prostate cancer and bone tumors and was likely in significant pain before he died. One thing that's for certain is that the man traveled extensively to erase all evidence of his existence, as he still remains unidentified to this day. In October of 2003, a Las Vegas audience watched in horror as Roy Horn of the famed duo Siegfried and Roy was mauled on stage by his own 600-pound white tiger, Manticore. What began as a dazzling birthday performance suddenly turned grim when the animal clamped its jaws around Roy's neck and dragged him off stage, crushing his windpipe and leaving him moments from death. He miraculously survived, but the attack left him partially paralyzed, ending the duo's legendary Vegas run after more than a decade at the Mirage. Roy later claimed he had felt faint during the act and that the tiger was simply trying to protect him, but many believe it was a brutal reminder that even a lifetime of training can't tame a predator's instincts. Singer and model Taylor Moll lives with one of the rarest genetic conditions on Earth, chimerism. While still in the womb, she absorbed her fraternal twin, and today her body carries 2 sets of DNA, her own and that of her lost sibling. The most striking evidence runs straight down her torso, where a sharp line divides 2 different skin tones, one coded by her DNA, the other by her twins. Doctors say she effectively lives with 2 immune systems, making her more prone to health insensitivities and turning her body into a living reminder of the sibling who never survived. On Halloween night in 1984, 29-year-old Doreen Erbert answered her door expecting trick-or-treaters, but instead was confronted by her ex-husband, William Michael Dennis, wearing the same creepy Big Bad Wolf mask he had worn at a party the year before. Dennis had never forgiven Doreen for the accidental drowning of their 4-year-old son Paul years earlier, and had grown obsessed with the delusion that she wanted the boy dead. Armed with a machete, he forced his way inside and launched a savage frenzy of blows, striking Doreen dozens of times. She was 8 months pregnant, and the attack was so brutal that it ripped open her abdomen and literally expelled her unborn child onto the floor, the baby showing deep chop wounds and pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later described the scene as straight out of a horror movie, with blood splattered across the entryway and the mask lying discarded nearby. Dennis was eventually sentenced to death, leaving behind a crime that remains one of the most grotesque murders ever committed on Halloween. A 28-year-old Malaysian woman went viral after pregnancy caused her to develop such severe acne and facial swelling that she appeared to age decades overnight. Hormonal surges left her skin red, inflamed, and scarred to the point of being nearly unrecognizable. While most women only develop mild breakouts or dark patches during pregnancy, her extreme case showed how brutally the body can sometimes react to carrying a child. Dumping ashes at Disney parks is so common that staff have secret code words like white powder alert or code grandma, prompting custodial crews to vacuum up the human remains using HEPA filters. Holy Land USA in Waterbury, Connecticut was once a popular religious theme park that drew thousands of families until its closure in the 1980s, after which it fell into decay. In July of 2010, the abandoned site became the setting for tragedy when 16-year-old Chloe Ottman was strangled to death right underneath the park's giant cross by 19-year-old Francisco Cruz after rejecting his sexual advances. Cruz hid her body on the property, later confessed, and was sentenced to 55 years in prison, forever tying the park's crumbling ruins to one of Connecticut's darkest crimes.